It was good. Hold up, hold up. Shit. Today we start reacting to videos, bro. These videos. Nice, nice, nice. Okay, okay. So I got the mic here, so my voice is a little bit louder. So yeah, you should put it over there. So so Goodfellas, bro, Goodfellas. Technically, I watched Casino before Goodfellas, but I mean, let's just watch this. It's gonna tell us the real Tommy. Yeah, it's the same. It's the same channel. Nice, nice. Okay.
In the annals of
Annals, hey yo. Oh, these are like some famous gangster movies, bro. See, you got this is I believe this is the Godfather, Al Pacino. You got Scarface, Al Pacino again. Robert De Niro, Casino. Yeah, yeah.
In the annals of mob movie history, no figure looms quite as large as Joe Pesci. Known for his portrayal of hyper-violent,
True.
short-tempered gangsters, Pesci electrified cinemas all across the world in 1990 with his Oscar-winning performance as Tommy DeVito, an aggressive and unpredictable mafia associate with the Lucchese crime family in the movie Goodfellas. While Joe
Lucchese.
Pesci's character was a sick individual, he was in fact a watered-down version of the real thing, as the producers for Goodfellas have come out and said that the real-life Tommy was so sadistic and callous that audiences would not have believed that such a man ever existed.
Also, the real, the real Tommy is more violent. Interesting.
So in this video, we will explore
I mean, that's kind of the case with like gangster movies. I mean, like look at The Wolf of Wall Street. That was a great movie, by the way. I watched that. Oh shit. I watched that like last week. Last week, I believe. And they said that the things that happen in the movie is like crazier in real life.
the rise and fall of the real Tommy, Tommy DeSimone. Tommy was born on May 24, 1950 in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to a family that already had strong connections to La Cosa Nostra.
Ooh,
1950 in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Cambridge.
It's to a family that already had strong connections to La Cosa Nostra, as his paternal grandfather Rosario
Or La Cosa Nostra is like a gang family, I believe. Yeah. Shit. Yeah.
a family that already had strong connections to La Cosa Nostra, as his paternal grandfather Rosario DeSimone and his uncle Frank DeSimone had both at one point been the boss of a crime family based in Los Angeles.
Ooh.
His two brothers, Robert and Anthony, were also associates with the Gambino family in New York. But the largest influence on young Tommy's life was family friend and mafia associate Jimmy Burke.
Oh.
Jimmy took a young Tommy under his wing.
Or in the movie, Jimmy Burke is Jimmy Conway, which is here, played by Robert De Niro.
And began involving him in various criminal schemes such as car theft, insurance fraud, and cigarette smuggling. As an adolescent, Tommy also would have been responsible for less glamorous duties, such as pouring drinks, serving food, and shining shoes. While Jimmy was a great earner and was also very popular due to his friendly and outgoing personality, he would never be a full member of a crew due to his Irish ancestry, as only full-blooded Italians are eligible to become an official member, also known as a maid.
Oh, full. Also, the like in the movie too, like Tommy, Joe Pesci, played by Joe Pesci, was the only one who was he became a maid gang member because he's like fully Italian. But the others are like they can't join because they're like Irish, like Robert De Niro's character, Jimmy Conway, and Henry Hill, Irishmen. Yeah, I think they're both Irishmen, so they couldn't. They are not considered to be like made men, if you understand.
Man of La Cosa Nostra. As such, Jimmy was an
Oh,
associate working under Paul Vario, a
oh,
capo with the Lucchese family operating in Brooklyn, New York. While Jimmy was known for his personal charm, inside he harbored a darkness and was known for his hair-trigger temper. As Henry Hill explained in the 1985 book Wise Guy, quote, Jimmy had a reputation for being wild. He'd whack you. There was no question. Jimmy could plant you just as fast as shake your hand. It didn't matter to him. At dinner, he could be the nicest guy in the world, but then he could blow you away for dessert. He was very scary, and he scared some very scary fellows. Nobody really knew where they stood with him, but he was also smarter than most of the guys he was around, and he was a great earner. Jimmy always brought in money for Paulie and the crew, and that in the end is why his craziness was tolerated.
yeah, Jimmy in the movie is like his own guy, like he gives money to Polly, the main boss. Yeah, here give to Polly. Where's Polly? Where's Polly? Oh yeah, Polly is the in the movie. This is the real Polly. So yeah, but he was like beating up people in same time, like Henry and Pesci too, and I mean Henry and Nicky. No, Henry and Tommy. I'm getting mixed up. Henry, Tommy, and what's his name? Jimmy. Yeah, Henry, Tommy, Jimmy.
Paulie and the crew, and that in the end is why his craziness was tolerated. In 1963, Jimmy introduced 14-year-old Tommy to Henry Hill, who was 21 at the time and had recently been discharged from the army. Jimmy and Henry to Henry Hill, who was
Jimmy introduced 14-year-old Tommy to. Oh, so when Tommy and Henry Hill met, Henry was like Tommy was Tommy was younger in the movie, but that they switched it. So like in the movie, let me just clarify. In the movie, Henry and Tommy met during teenage years, and Jimmy was already an adult. But here is Henry who's the adult, and Tommy is like the kid, and then Jimmy is also an adult. Yeah,
21 at the time and had recently been
21.
discharged from the army. Jimmy and Henry had recently gotten involved in the cigarette smuggling business, and it
Oh,
was proving to be highly lucrative. Jimmy asked Henry to watch out for the young Tommy and to teach him the ins and outs of the cigarette business. Before long, the two were making almost $400 every day.
also it's like in real life, Henry was like a mentor to Tommy, basically.
Selling smuggled cigarettes at construction sites and subway stations all throughout Brooklyn. The two were generating so much money that before long they purchased their own semi-trailer, which they would frequently drive down to North Carolina and fill to the brim with cigarette cartons, which went for $2.10 compared to New York, where the same carton would cost $3.75 because of the difference in cigarette taxes. This plan was so successful that it didn't take long for the market to become oversaturated with cheap cigarettes, as other groups such as the Colombo crew got wise to the scheme and began smuggling in cigarettes too. But by that point, Henry and Tommy had already moved on, and they were now stealing cars off the streets and then shipping them to Haiti, which earned them approximately $750 a car. They
Dang.
were also involved in numerous other crimes, such as extortion, fraud, fencing, stolen property, and truck hijacking.
Wait.
Earned them approximately on, and they were now
Henry and Tommy. Okay.
fraud, fencing, stolen property, and truck hijacking.
Right.
Even in those early days, Tommy quickly gained a reputation for having an explosive temper and was known to lose his cool at the drop of a hat. He also seemed to enjoy hurting others, as it was a tradition of his that every time he purchased a new firearm, he would first try it out on a random civilian that same day. Henry saw this firsthand one night as the two were walking down a Brooklyn street. Tommy, who was 17 at the time, said, quote, "Hey, Henry, watch this!" He then shouted at a random passerby, "Hey, cocksucker!" When the man turned around, Tommy pulled out a pistol and shot him several times. The man was a complete stranger, and as he lay dying, Henry said, "Wow, that was cold-blooded." To which Tommy replied, "Well, I'm a mean cat." Henry would later speculate that Tommy's bloodlust stemmed from the fact that one of his older brothers had cooperated with police years ago, and because of that, he felt a need to overcompensate by being the most bloodthirsty guy in the whole crew.
Oh, so Tommy's older brother. Yeah, I noticed this. I remember this saying. I remember like comments saying that Tommy's older brother was like he was a he informed the police on gang activities, and now Tommy is trying to show that he is not with the police. He is with the gang. He's one of them, the family, you know.
One thing he wasn't overcompensating for, however, was his size. As in the movie Goodfellas, the character based on him is played by Joe Pesci, who stands at just 5'4". In real life, however, Tommy was muscle-bound and stood at 6'2",
Oh, he was bigger, bro.
and was known for his intimidating physical presence.
Damn.
In 1948, New York International Airport, later renamed JFK International, opened up in Queens, New York, and by the early 1960s, over $30 billion worth of cargo passed through the airport every year. This proved an irresistible lure for local gangsters.
Yep, they kept robbing from the airports. I heard something. Oh, never mind.
And soon, almost every criminal organization in New York had people at the airport scoping out potential scores. No one was better at robbing the airport than Jimmy, who created a complex web of insiders and collaborators who kept him informed of where and when the best loot was coming in.
Jimmy.
Because many of the airport's 50,000 employees were from the local area, it was easy for Jimmy to threaten them into compliance. Some were even already indebted to Jimmy and his associates. An example of this was an Eastern Airlines truck driver who had accumulated a massive gambling debt with one of Jimmy's bookies. In return for the debt being forgiven, the truck driver accidentally dropped some mail pouches on the road to the post office. When Jimmy went to collect them, he discovered that they contained almost $200,000 in cash, money orders, and stocks.
Oh, this is interesting. It's a bit different. Hold up. Wait, just do something. The Wolf. Yeah, the Wolf of Wall Street. Casino. Shit. This Saints of Newark. Hell yeah. Hold up. Okay. Let's get back.
Now, while many airport employees either took bribes or were threatened into helping, some honest individuals went to the police. These brave souls were routinely murdered by Jimmy and his crew, with Tommy often being the trigger man. These brave souls were threatened into helping. Some honest individuals went to the police. These brave souls were routinely murdered by Jimmy and his crew, with Tommy often being the trigger man. Corrupt cops on Jimmy's payroll regularly informed him of any potential witnesses, who were then quickly killed before they could become a problem.
Damn. So any innocent people, any innocent guy just die basically.
1 year, over 10 such people were murdered on Jimmy's orders, and their bodies would eventually be discovered in the trunks of several abandoned cars in the airport's long-term parking area. On April 7, 1967, Jimmy's crew orchestrated what was at that point their single largest heist.
Dang.
According to an inside source, Air France was the carrier for American currency that had been exchanged in Southeast Asia, and so the airline routinely returned money back to the U.S. for depositing with American banks.
Wait, Asia is involved? Or Asia, like airlines? Okay.
The insider claimed that one plane usually delivered 3 or 4 packages each containing $60,000, and that it would be easy to steal. And so, on April 7th, Tommy and Henry drove to the Air France cargo terminal at JFK Airport with an empty suitcase. The two then simply walked into the area unchallenged and used a duplicate key to enter the vault. They then filled their suitcase to the brim with money and then just walked out with $420,000. No one was harmed, and no shots were fired, with the robbery not being discovered until 2 days later.
Aye.
With his share of the heist, Henry purchased a restaurant on Queens Boulevard named The Sweet. While he initially planned for it to be a legitimate business that would be kept far away from his criminal associates, within a couple of months, it became another mob hangout and was particularly popular with high-ranking Gambino family members.
Damn.
It was here where Tommy would commit his most infamous act. In early June 1970, William Bentvena, also known as Billy Bats, was released from prison after an 8-year sentence for selling Vena, also
1970, June 1970.
also known as Billy Bats, was released from prison after an 8-year sentence for selling narcotics to an undercover police officer. When a mobster gets out of prison,
What?
8-year sentence for selling narcotics to an undercover police officer. When a mobster gets out of prison, it's customary that his friends throw him a large party to celebrate. Bats was a made man with the Gambino family, and he was also longtime friends with future Gambino family boss John Gotti. The celebration was held at Robert's Lounge, a nightclub owned by Jimmy. Late into the evening, a visibly drunk Billy noticed Tommy sitting at the end of the bar. Tommy was only 20 at this point, and so Billy recognized him as the 12-year-old shoeshine boy he had known all those years ago before prison, now all grown up. He then made a snide remark asking Tommy if he still shined shoes. Henry described what happened next by saying, quote, "I looked over at Tommy, and I could see he was fuming at the way Billy was talking. Tommy was going nuts, but he couldn't do or say anything. Billy was a made man. If Tommy so much as took a slap at Billy, Tommy was dead. Still, I knew he was pissed. We kept drinking and laughing, and just when I thought maybe it was all forgotten, Tommy leaned over to Jimmy and me and said, 'I'm gonna kill that fuck.'"
Oh,
While Henry tried to dissuade him, Jimmy instead took the opposite course of action, and over the next couple days he continuously reminded Tommy of what had happened and the disrespect that Billy had shown him. He likely did this because before Billy went to prison, he had been operating a lucrative loan sharking business that Jimmy had taken over while he was in custody.
oh. So before that, Billy Bats. I'm gonna use the movie names. Billy Bats was
He had been operating a lucrative loan sharking business that
loan sharking business. So Billy Bats was operating loan sharking business before he went to prison. But because he went to prison, then Jimmy, Robert De Niro, in the movie, he took over that business. So now he's like trying to get. So Robert De Niro is trying to get Joe Pesci to kill Billy Bats. I'm just using the name to clarify things, to make it more simple.
Jimmy had taken over while he was in custody. Now Billy was eager to get his business back, which Jimmy had no intention of letting happen.
Yep.
2 weeks later, on June 11th, Billy was inside the suite drinking. Close to midnight, Tommy walked in and noticed that Billy was there alone, and so he quickly whispered something to Jimmy, who then approached Billy and started buying him more drinks. Tommy then whispered to Henry, "Keep him here. I'm going for a bag," which Henry knew meant that he was getting a body bag.
Oh.
While Tommy was gone, Jimmy kept Billy entertained by telling him stories, while also making sure that his cup was never empty. It seemed to Henry that Billy was having a great time, but 20 minutes later, Tommy was back. This time carrying the bag in one hand and a gun in the other. As Tommy quietly approached, Jimmy put his arm lightly over Billy's shoulder in a friendly manner. Henry described what happened next by saying, quote, "I was on the other side of the bar when Tommy took the .38 out of his pocket. Billy saw it in Tommy's hand.
Billy saw it.
The second he saw what was happening, Jimmy tightened his arm around Billy's neck. "Shine these fucking shoes!" Tommy yells and smashes the gun right into the side of Billy's head. Billy's eyes opened wide. Tommy smashed him again. Jimmy kept his grip. The blood began to come out of Billy's head. It looked black. The beating was so savage that all three men presumed that Billy was dead, and so they shoved his body into the trunk of Henry's car. They knew that since Billy was a made man, the Gambinos would spare no expense in finding his killers.
Yeah.
So it was imperative that they hid his body somewhere it would never be discovered. Jimmy said that he knew a guy who owned an animal hospital in upstate New York, where no one would ever look. With no other options, the three then climbed into Henry's car and began the journey. On the way, they stopped at Tommy's house to pick up a shovel. Unfortunately for them, though, his mother was still awake, and she made them all stay for coffee and breakfast. The three were
Nice.
there for a little under an hour, and then immediately resumed their mission. 2 hours later, while they were on the highway, a loud thumping noise soon started to come from the trunk. It was so loud it woke Jimmy from his sleep. The three then stared at each other before they all realized that Billy wasn't dead. Tommy angrily slammed the brakes.
Oh, wait, hold up. Shit. Fuck. Ah, fuck. Oh, so in the movie, I thought the intro, right? The intro was like them saying that them driving, Henry was driving, and then they heard a thumping noise. I thought they were like pretending to not know what was happening because of the radio or something. Like my theory was that the radios were like recorded, right? Like radios in the car and all that. Like police can, with technology, they can just like listen to anything, and then they just like pretending they don't know anything, and then when they finally got off, then they actually killed the guy. But now it's like, but the real story is they they didn't know the guy was actually still alive, so they just killed him. So yeah, what the fuck? What happened to? Okay, okay. Shouldn't Ogma. Holy shit. Wait. Oh fuck.
2 hours later, while they were on the highway, a loud thumping noise soon started to come from the trunk. It was so loud it woke Jimmy from his sleep. The three then stared at each other before they all realized that Billy wasn't dead. Tommy angrily slammed the brakes and then leaned over the seat and grabbed the shovel. Without a word, the three men then got out of the car and waited until there were no more headlights coming up the highway.
No more headlights. Okay. Wait, hold up. I need both of these to play at the same time. Hold up.
They then opened the trunk, and Tommy started smashing Billy with his shovel while Jimmy hit him using a tire iron.
Oh,
After only a couple of seconds, they then closed the trunk and silently resumed their journey. By the time they arrived at their destination, it was almost morning, and it took almost an hour for them to dig a big enough hole. They then covered Billy with lime, filled the hole, and drove back to New York City. But they weren't done with Billy yet, as just 3 months later, Jimmy learned that his friend who owned the animal hospital had sold the land to housing developers.
oh.
He then ordered Tommy and Henry to travel back to the scene and dig up Billy's body in order to bury it somewhere else. The two then drove back to New York City, with Billy's body in the trunk of Henry's new Pontiac Catalina convertible, and buried him in the basement
Or this is like from the movie, the red car convertible, the Catalina convertible.
of Robert's lounge. And then a couple of months later, they dug Billy up again and put him in a trash compactor in a New Jersey junkyard. For weeks after, Henry couldn't escape the stench of Billy's body and smelled it everywhere, no matter how many times he washed his clothes or showered. Eventually, he burned
Who?
and smelled it everywhere, no matter how many For weeks after, Henry couldn't escape the stench of Billy's body and smelled it everywhere, no matter how many times he washed his clothes or showered. Eventually, he burned the outfit he was wearing that day, and also left his car in a junkyard. Tommy thought he was crazy and said that he would have happily kept the car so the smell would remind him every day about how he had taken care of that miserable bastard Billy Batts. Not long after the Batts murder, Jimmy, Tommy, Henry, and several of their associates were drinking and playing cards in the basement of Robert's lounge when their server, a 16-year-old kid named Michael Spider
I
Gianco,
do
forgot
again.
to get Tommy's drink. Tommy started berating him and then pulled out his handgun and started shooting at the floor near Spider, telling him to dance. One of the bullets struck Spider in the thigh, and he had to be taken to a local doctor. A week later, Spider was back at the card game serving drinks, this time with a full leg cast. At 3 in the morning, a drunk Tommy then began shouting at Spider and ordered him to dance for their amusement. In an act of defiance, Spider instead said, "Tommy, go fuck yourself." which led to Tommy seething as his friends began making jokes at his expense, with Jimmy saying, "What, Tommy, are you going to take that from this punk?" Then out of nowhere, Tommy pulled out his pistol and shot Spider 3 times in the
So everything that happened here was like in the movie too.
chest, killing him. For a moment, no one said a word, until finally Jimmy got up and yelled, "All right, you dumb fuck, if you're going to be a big fucking wise guy, you dig the hole." Tommy felt insulted and began swearing to himself, but he eventually took Spider's body and dug a hole in the cellar. Tommy was getting out of control, and by that point, even routine extortion missions would end in murder. A couple of weeks later, while Jimmy and his crew were unloading stolen cigarettes at a trucking warehouse, the foreman, who had no idea who Jimmy or any of his men were, demanded
Wait, what?
extortion
Yo, ass. Hold up.
hole in the cellar. Tommy was getting out of control,
Oh,
and by that point, even routine extortion missions would end in murder. A couple of weeks later, while Jimmy and his crew were unloading stolen cigarettes,
wait, hold up. Oh, grandfather. Oh, okay.
missions would end in murder. A couple of weeks later, while Jimmy and his crew were unloading stolen cigarettes at a trucking warehouse, the foreman, who had no idea who Jimmy or any of his men were, demanded to see their union cards. The foreman said that if they weren't able to provide their union cards, then he was going to shut down the loading dock. Jimmy tried to reason with the man, then bribe him, and when that didn't work, he threatened him. But the foreman wouldn't be intimidated, and so Jimmy left. The next day, he sent Tommy and another member of his crew named Stanley Diamond to the man's house to intimidate him. The foreman lived in New Jersey, and on the drive over, both Tommy and Stanley got more and more angry about the situation, about how the man wouldn't listen.
Wait, what?
Drive over, both Tommy and Stanley got more and more angry.
My back pain.
The foreman lived in New Jersey, and on the drive over, both Tommy and Stanley got more and more angry about the situation, about how the man wouldn't listen to Jimmy, and now because of that, they had to drive all the way out to New Jersey. Jimmy had ordered them to just rough up the foreman, so he'd cooperate next time, but instead, they beat him to death in his own house. Nobody was safe from Tommy and his sadistic nature, not even his friends or their loved ones. In 1972, Henry was convicted of extortion and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. While he was serving his sentence in Lewisburg Penitentiary in Pennsylvania, Tommy took this as an opportunity and attempted to rape Henry's wife, Karen. When she resisted him, he instead beat her up and left. Henry was released on parole on July 12, 1978, and almost immediately after he was told by a local bookie named Marty Krugman that the German airline Lufthansa flew in large amounts of US dollars to its cargo terminal at JFK International Airport. Henry brought the tip to Jimmy, who began planning for what would eventually turn out to be the heist of the century. The intricate details of the heist and its aftermath are beyond the scope of this video, and will be covered in a future video. But suffice it to say the heist was a complete success, and in the end, Jimmy and his crew made out with almost $6 million in cash and $875,000 in jewelry, making it the largest robbery ever committed on U.S. soil at the time. After the heist, a Lucchese family associate named Parnell Stacks Edwards was
In the movie, he was played by Samuel L. Jackson.
tasked with disposing of the getaway vehicle. He was supposed to drive it to New Jersey where it would be destroyed in a junkyard. Instead, however, he got high and left the vehicle parked in front of a fire hydrant outside his girlfriend's house. The police discovered the vehicle 2 days after the robbery and found Stack's fingerprints all over it, and they soon connected it to the heist. After learning what had happened, Paul Vario ordered Tommy to take out Stacks, which he did on December 18th, shooting him 5 times in the head. This would prove to be Tommy's final murder, as unbeknownst to him, the Gambinos were hot on his trail, and this would prove to be Tommy's final murder, as unbeknownst to him, the Gambinos were hot on his trail and out for blood. In addition to his murder of Billy Batts, Tommy had also earned their ire by killing Ronald Foxy Giroth in 1974. Foxy Gambinos were hot on his trail and out. This would prove to be Tommy's final murder, as unbeknownst to him, the Gambinos were hot on his trail and out for blood. In addition to his murder of Billy Batts, Tommy had also earned their ire by killing Ronald Foxy Giroth in 1974. Foxy was a protege of John Gotti and a popular member of the Gambino crew, who had a reputation for being a great earner. Tommy had been dating Foxy's younger sister, and when she broke up with him, he savagely beat her.
What?
which he did on December 18th, 1974. Foxy was a
Foxy.
protege of John Gotti and a popular member of the Gambino crew, who had a reputation for being a great earner. Tommy had been dating Foxy's younger sister, and when she broke up with him, he savagely beat her.
Damn.
This led to Foxy telling anyone who'd listen that he wanted to kill Tommy. And so on December 18th, 1974, Tommy went to Foxy's house and knocked on the door. When he opened it, he immediately punched Tommy in the face, which caused him to fall over. On the ground, Tommy managed to pull out his handgun and shoot Foxy dead. 5 years later, on January 14th, 1979, Tommy's wife reported him missing to police. She claimed that the last time she had seen her husband was a few weeks earlier when he had borrowed $60 from her. What exactly happened isn't clear, but what is known is that the week after Christmas, Jimmy and Henry traveled to Fort Lauderdale in Florida to resolve some issues related to a recent drug deal. Tommy normally would have gone with them, but he was finally becoming a made man, and thus would have to stay in New York to attend the ceremony
Who?
with them. But he was resolve some issues related to a
Oh.
man. Tommy went, and thus would have to stay.
Yeah, this is same as the movie. Yeah, Tommy in the movie, Tommy played by Joe Pesci, he became a made man. So yeah,
Tommy normally would have gone with them, but he was finally becoming a made man, and thus would have to stay in New York to attend the ceremony.
yeah.
While the two were in Florida, Jimmy went to a phone booth so he could call back home and hear the good news. But after he came out of the booth, Henry would later recall, quote, "He came out of the booth and I saw he had tears in his eyes. I don't know what's going on. And he says that they just whacked Tommy. The Gotti crew.
Body.
They whacked Tommy. It was over Tommy having killed Billy Batts and a guy named Foxy. They were made guys with the Gambinos. And Tommy had killed them without an okay. Nobody knew Tommy had done it, but the Gambinos had somehow gotten the proof. They
Shit.
had a sit down with Paulie, and they got his okay to kill Tommy.
Oh,
How the Gambinos found out what Tommy had done, and just who was the person to kill him, is still a subject of controversy. Henry himself would later speculate that the drug deal that had sent him and Jimmy to Florida was nothing but a ruse to get them both out of the way. Then when Tommy arrived at the meeting, John Gotti personally pulled the trigger and shot him in the back of the head. Others believe that Tommy was slowly tortured to death by either Gotti or another member of the Gambino family named Thomas Agro, who was a close friend of Foxy, and was also the same man who would kill Tommy's older brother Anthony later that year.
damn.
As for how the Gambinos learned of Tommy's role in the death of Billy Batts, it is believed by many mob historians that information was supplied to them by none other than Paul Vario, who unbeknownst to anyone else had been carrying on an affair with Henry's wife Karen that had started while he was serving time in federal prison.
Oh fuck.
Paul had never liked Tommy due to his unpredictable nature, and some believe that when he heard that Tommy had tried to rape Karen that it was the last straw. But these are just theories, and it is likely that we will never definitively know the story of Tommy DeSimone's final hours. And that was the video. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.
Oh hell. It's the same as the movie, bro. Interesting. It's been 3 minutes. 1080. Okay, guys. The 1990 film Goodfellas, Joe Pesci plays Tommy DeVito, short-tempered, hyper-violent mafia associate. His character was based on Tommy DeSimone, a man who was so depraved that even other mobsters were wary of him. Damn. Nice. Damn. Tommy, Jimmy, and Polly. Bacon Brothers. Infamous gangsters. Really lesson to perform. Damn. Casino. Okay, let's watch Casino now. It was Joe Pesci character in Goodfellas, and now it's Joe Pesci's character in Casino. Hold up. 30 minutes.
In the sprawling
Damn. Oh, they also put the real Jimmy Conway, bro. Shit. Fuck. Oh shoot. What's it? There's a lag. Zero waits.
In the sprawling urban jungle of 1960s Chicago, a flamboyant and barbarous figure emerged from the depths of the city's underworld. He was known nationwide for his cruel and capricious behavior, with a mere mention of his name being enough to strike fear into the hearts of both friend and foe alike. His name was Anthony Spilotro, and despite the fact that he stood at just 5'2", he built himself a terrifying reputation as a cold-blooded killer, which led to him being personally entrusted by his bosses in the Chicago
Bosses and lieutenants. Oh, this is
Next 6 months, I got to know the ins and outs of Wall Street. Making big money as I geared up to take my Series 7.
shut your. Shit. Huh. Yeah, see you, General DS.
License.
as a cold-blooded killer, which
So in the movie, Joe Pesci is short, and the real life, Tony Spilotro is also short. So this is like, yeah, it's accurate.
led to him being personally entrusted by his bosses in the Chicago outfit to oversee their lucrative operations in Las Vegas and to ensure that everyone was kept in line. But Tony had far larger aspirations, and in the end his hubris and overwhelming need to always be the center of attention would lead to his shocking downfall and ultimately endanger everything the mob had built in Vegas. Tony was born on May 19th, 1938 in the south side of Chicago. He grew up in a small two-story house in an Italian neighborhood where he shared a single bedroom with his 5 brothers. His father, Pasquale Spilotro, owned and operated Patsy's Restaurant, a small deli that was famous throughout Chicago for its homemade meatballs. It was also a popular hangout spot for high-ranking Chicago mobsters, such as Gus Alex, Jackie the Lackey, Frank the Enforcer, and even outfit boss Sam Giancana. Like many of the local neighborhood kids, a young Tony idolized
Outfit boss.
Sam Giancana. Like many of the local neighborhood kids, a young Tony idolized these grizzled gangsters and performed numerous thankless jobs for them, such as bringing them coffee, picking up their dry cleaning, or shining their shoes. One day during the performance of the latter task, Tony first met Frank Collada. The two were both carrying shine boxes and got into a massive argument over who was allowed to shine shoes on Grand Avenue. They shoved each other a little, but ultimately they both went their separate ways. Then not long after Tony's father heard him mention Frank. His father wanted to know if Frank was related to Joe Collada. A couple of years beforehand, Tony's father had been accosted by some local criminals demanding protection money. Instead of paying, he went to Joe, who was a feared gangster in their neighborhood and was renowned as the best driver in the city.
Damn.
The extortionists backed down. Joe had been killed in a shootout with police a couple of months later, but even so, Tony's father felt a
Peace, bro.
had been killed in a shootout with police a couple of months later, but even so, Tony's father felt a sense of loyalty to his memory, and so he ordered his son to end his feud with Frank. The next day, Tony approached Frank and said, "Hey, I want to talk to you. My father and your father were friends, and so now we're going to be friends forever." The two did indeed become friends, and they formed a small gang that also included Tony's brothers, as well as several other youths from the area. Despite his small stature, Tony quickly gained a reputation as the toughest kid in the neighborhood. So much so, in fact, that his older brother Victor would even offer other kids $5 if they could beat him up. Usually, Tony was able to handle himself, but if it ever looked like the other guy was going to win, then his whole gang would jump the other guy and give him a savage beatdown.
Oh shit.
At first, Tony's gang participated in petty crimes such as vandalism and breaking and entering, but it wasn't long before they had graduated to armed robbery. A particularly lucrative scheme was for one member to wait inside a bank until they saw someone take out a large sum of money. The gang would then stalk that individual and rob them when they were alone. According to Frank, this plan was so successful that some months they'd steal over $25,000. A 17-year-old Frank was intent on enjoying his newfound wealth, and so he purchased a brand new Cadillac. Tony had different ideas, however, as he was using his share of the robbery money to ingratiate himself with the Chicago mob.
Oh, he became a part of the mob.
When he
Technically.
saw the Cadillac, he even warned Frank to take it back, because he knew that if anyone affiliated with the outfit saw it, they'd come after Frank and demand a cut of his ill-gotten money. Before long, Tony started hanging out with an outfit enforcer named Vinny the Saint. Despite the fact that Vinny was even shorter than Tony, standing at just 5'1", he had a fearsome reputation as a cold-hearted killer. Through Vinny, Tony was introduced to important outfit members, such as Willie Potatoes, Joe the Clown, Milwaukee Phil, and future boss Joey Doves. Even in those early days, Tony had just one goal in mind, telling Frank one day, quote, "One of these days, I'm going to be the boss of the whole syndicate." Tony was eager to prove himself, and his opportunity would come one fateful day in 1962. Two members of Frank's robbery crew, Billy McCarthy and Jimmy Miraglia, had recently been involved in an altercation at Andre's Lounge, a bar owned by the outfit. The two had been drinking heavily and were acting belligerent, and so they were beat up and thrown out of the bar by brothers Ronnie and Philip Scalvo. Embarrassed, both Billy and Jimmy swore revenge, and a couple of weeks later they parked their car outside the bar and waited for the brothers to get off work. When they saw the Scalvos along with one of their girlfriends get into a car and drive off, the two followed. After traveling behind them for a bit, the two saw their opportunity when the brothers drove into an upper-class residential area called Elmwood Park. While at a stop sign, they pulled up to the Scalvo's car and opened fire. Philip was hit in the neck and put the car in reverse, which caused it to crash right and opened fire. Philip was hit in the neck and put the car in reverse, which caused it to crash right into a nearby home.
Oh,
Jimmy and Billy then emptied their pistols into the car, killing all three of its occupants.
dang.
This incident soon turned into a major scandal for the outfit. Elmwood Park was one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in all of Chicago, with a large number of both politicians and high-ranking mobsters calling it home. Because of this, it was a rule understood by all that committing any crimes in Elmwood Park was absolutely forbidden.
Oh,
A couple of days later, Frank received a call from Tony asking to meet him at a nearby bowling alley. When Frank arrived, he noticed a stark change in Tony's usual demeanor. He was all business. I could tell he was on assignment from the boys. I knew this was where he was going to prove himself, and I didn't want to be his proof.
Frank.
Tony noticed Frank's anxiety and reassured him by saying that they were okay, but that he needed to call Billy and tell him that they had to meet up later that night. Tony even supplied the lie and told him to tell Billy that they had a great score lined up, and because of that, they needed to meet urgently. Frank was hesitant, but Tony claimed that all he wanted to do was talk to Billy and see if he had any information. Since Tony hadn't mentioned Jimmy, Frank figured that he was telling the truth, and so he called Billy and set up the meeting for later that night at a restaurant called the Chicken House. The two then took Frank's car and began driving to the restaurant, but on the way, Tony said that they had to make a quick stop at another restaurant first. As they pulled into the parking lot, Tony got out of make a quick stop at another restaurant and see if he had, and so he called Billy and then took Frank's car and began driving to the restaurant. But on the way, Tony said that they had to make a quick stop at another restaurant first. As they pulled into the parking lot, Tony got out of the car and had a short conversation with the driver of a dark blue Ford. Tony then said that Frank had to get out of his car and wait inside the Ford. Frank got in and realized the driver was none other than Vinny the Saint. The two sat in complete silence while Tony took Frank's car and drove away. 40 minutes later, Tony returned and only said, "Don't worry, everything went well." He then got in Vinny's car and drove off. Later that night, Frank received a call from Billy's wife who asked him if he had seen her husband, as it was unusual for him to be out so late. Frank lied and said he had no idea what happened to him, and then went to sleep. Received a call from... He then got in Vinny's car and drove off. Later that night, Frank received a call from Billy's wife who asked him if he had seen her husband, as it was unusual for him to be out so late. Frank lied and said he had no idea what happened to him, and then went to sleep. For him to be out so late. Frank lied and said he had no idea what happened to him, and then went to sleep. 3 days later, Frank happened to run into Jimmy at a restaurant. Frank warned him that Billy had disappeared and said that he should leave town, to which Jimmy replied, "Why? I have nothing to run or hide from." A week later, the police discovered the bodies of both Billy and Jimmy in the trunk of Jimmy's abandoned car. A day later, Frank received a call from Tony, who told him that they needed to talk. A jubilant Tony claimed that he was going to become a made man with the outfit soon, and when asked why, he then recounted to Frank the entire story of Billy McCarthy's last moments. Tony had driven to the chicken house in Frank's car, and had parked it right in front of the restaurant, and then went inside. When Billy arrived, he saw Frank's car and assumed that he was already inside waiting. As he entered, he was called over by Tony, car, and it right in front of the restaurant, and then went inside. When Billy arrived, he saw Frank's car and assumed that he was already inside waiting. As he entered, he was called over by Tony, who was sitting in a booth alone, and claimed that he was there waiting for Frank as well. The two then sat together for a little while and made small talk before Billy decided that he didn't want to wait for Frank anymore and left. When Tony and Billy exited the restaurant, they were followed want to wait for Frank anymore and left. When Tony and Billy exited the restaurant, they were followed by two men who had been sitting separately inside. Just as Billy opened his car door, he was surrounded by Tony, as well as those two mysterious men, whom he soon recognized as Chucky Nicoletti and Milwaukee Phil, hitmen who only answered to the outfit's upper echelon. The three men then tied up Billy and forced him to lay on the car floor. Tony then returned Frank's car, while his two associates took Billy to a mob-run workshop. When Tony got to the workshop later, Billy was already being tortured. For the next several hours, the three men went to work on Billy, intent on getting him to reveal the name of his partner by any means necessary. But no matter what they did, Billy kept his mouth shut. At least, that was until Tony dragged Billy to a workbench and put his head in a vice. Tony tightened the vice until one of Billy's eyes popped out. Only then did he finally give them the name they were looking for. Tony believed that after such a barbaric display it wouldn't be long before he was officially made, but his fortunes quickly turned not long after. One day when Sam Giancana's top hitman Fiore Buccieri was in New York on business, someone had broken into his house and stolen over $400,000. They had also put a gun in his wife's face and stolen all of her jewelry. Buccieri went crazy when he heard about it and did everything in his power to find the culprit, including having some corrupt cops bring him thousands of different mugshots for his wife to look over. But it was no use, as 2 weeks had gone by and he was still no closer to identifying the culprit. Then one of his underlings told him that the only person he knew who was crazy enough to have done such a thing was Tony Spilotro. The only person he knew who was crazy enough to have done such a thing was Tony Spilotro. With nothing else to go on, Buccieri ordered Tony to come to his house. Tony knew that such an invitation could only mean trouble, and so he asked a good friend of his named Frank Lefty Rosenthal to go with him. Even though Lefty was 9 years older than Tony, the two were good friends, as they had both been raised in the same neighborhood, and
So Robert De Niro,
he asked a good friend of his named
Sam H. Rothstein.
friends, as they had both been raised in the same neighborhood and also ran in the same circles. Lefty was a sports gambler renowned all throughout the criminal underworld as one of the best in the business, and he worked closely with several high-ranking mobsters, including Buccieri. When the two arrived, They were ushered downstairs and into the basement, where they met Buccieri. He ordered Tony to sit down in a chair, and then asked, "Do you know what happened to me?" To which Tony replied, "Yeah, I'm sorry it happened." When asked if he knew anyone who would do something like that, Tony responded, "No," in an annoyed tone of voice. When Buccieri asked, "Are you sure?" Tony sarcastically replied, "I already answered that question." Instantly, Buccieri threw Tony to the ground and started strangling him. Tony would later tell Frank that he thought he was gonna die, but Lefty immediately stepped in and began begging Buccieri to let him go, telling him that Tony has a stupid mouth, but he didn't mean any disrespect. Buccieri eventually let Tony go and let him off with a warning. "I don't want to see you around here ever again, and if I find out that you know what took place in my home and didn't tell me, I'll wipe out your whole family." Tony said his apologies before quickly leaving the premises with Lefty. While this incident proved to be life-threatening, it didn't prove to be career-threatening, as Tony did eventually become a made man.
He still became a made man. I forgot this was Casino, bro. Like the whole background, the whole background story of this guy is like so long until Casino, until they until they be like until Robert De Niro became the owner of Casino, which is, I think, it's Lefty in here in the real story.
And he was put in charge of a large bookmaking operation on the northwest side of Chicago. He
Bookmaking.
also had numerous teams of burglars operating all throughout the city on his orders.
It's like the movie.
Tony had garnered a reputation as a master thief and was known for his ability to quickly put together a skilled team who would be able to rob a place clean without any alarms or witnesses. He also operated a lucrative loan sharking business alongside infamous gangster Mad Sam. For a brief period of time, lucrative loan sharking business alongside infamous gangster Mad Sam. For a brief period of time, he even worked as a bail bondsman, with mob-provided credentials, of course. The purpose of this new occupation was so Tony could access sensitive court documents that his bosses hoped would reveal who the FBI's undercover informants were.
Damn.
From the courthouse, Tony learned the identity and address of an FBI agent named William Romer. One day, Tony stalked Romer as he left the gym and followed him to an isolated area of Columbus Park. When Tony crept behind a corner, he was hoping to see the agent meeting with an undercover informant. But instead, Romer was standing there with a gun pointed directly at him. "Looking for me, pal?" Romer asked. "Just taking a walk. Ain't this a public park?" Tony sarcastically retorted. Every question the agent asked, Tony would refuse to answer, even when asked why he was following him. "Who's following you? I'm just walking in the park." When the agent said he didn't believe that, Tony responded, "I don't give a fuck what you believe." Romer then changed tactics and told Tony that he was still a young guy who had his entire life ahead of him and that he shouldn't waste it by leading a life of crime. Unsurprisingly, though, the message didn't get through to Tony. Yeah, life of crime. Unsurprisingly, though, the message didn't get through to Tony. "Yeah, I should live like you, asshole. I see how you live. I seen your house. Big shot. Live in a little dump out there by the steel mills. Big fucking deal. Why would I want to live like you?" Even with a gun pointed in his face by a man almost double his size, Tony didn't care. He kept the same attitude, one that the FBI agent would describe as, "That was Tony. He dared you to murder him." It was through this interaction Tony would earn his famous nickname, as any time a colleague or media contact asked about him, Romer would say, "Who? You mean that little pissant?" But due to the standards of the time, Romer would say,
"Tony Spilotro runs mobs, Western Empire with ruthless efficiency."
"Who? You mean that little pissant?" But due to the standards of the time, such a word wasn't fit for publication, so any time he appeared in the newspapers, they instead called him Tony the Ant. While this press creation might not have been his first choice for a nickname, Tony loved the attention he received from the media, and he delighted in making faces for the cameras as he walked by. While mobsters generally like to keep their names out of the newspapers, Tony relished it, and would frequently pull stunts to ensure his name remained in the headlines. As much as the media loved following Tony around, they were surpassed in their infatuation by the police, who had him on watch 24/7. Law enforcement suspected that he was involved in the brutal murder of Billy McCarthy and Jimmy Moralia, and also believed he was involved in numerous others. But Tony was smart and learned how to evade a police tail and only spoke about business in code words. In 1967, police raided Tony's house after learning he was operating an illegal gambling den. He had to pay a fine but served no jail time. Then 2 years later, an informant tipped them off that Tony was running a gambling operation inside an abandoned factory. When the police arrived, some of Tony's men stalled them at the door while he and the rest began eating the paper bets and other financial records to destroy evidence. When the cops finally got inside, they only found enough incriminating evidence to force Tony to pay another fine. With the heat only continuing to rise, high-ranking outfit member Tony Big Tuna Accardo had a brilliant idea. The mob's current top enforcer in Vegas, Marshall Cafano, had gotten himself banned from every casino on the Strip. Someone new needed to take his role, and Accardo believed that Tony was the right man for the job due to his fearsome reputation. In this new role, Tony would work with his old friend, Lefty Rosenthal, to ensure that the Chicago boss's scheme to embezzle profits from the casinos continued without a hitch. With squeaky clean frontman Alan Glick as the casino's owner, it was Lefty's job to access the safe squeaky clean frontman Alan Glick as the casino's owner.
Or the owner.
It was Lefty's job to access the safe rooms and remove as much money as possible before it was recorded as revenue, which he excelled at. Tony was tasked with keeping a close eye on Lefty and Glick, but most importantly to ensure that the money kept on flowing back to Chicago. In 1971, Tony, his wife Nancy, and 4-year-old son Vincent moved into a 3-bedroom house in a middle-class neighborhood in Vegas. Tony and Nancy became fast friends with Lefty and his new wife Jerry McGee, and the two couples spent a lot of time together hanging out at each other's house or at the country club. Tony also attended every Little League game his son played in. While Tony had initially tried to create the facade that he was living a happy suburban life, his plan quickly fell apart. As the instant he had stepped foot in Vegas, the local police as well as the FBI were made aware, as Chicago police had sent them his record, as well as all of the evidence that they had ever collected on him. Almost immediately, the police began following Tony wherever he went, just like they had in Chicago. But he still managed to stay one step ahead of law enforcement, and they were unable to impede his plan.
So it's like a whole cycle. If you think about it, it's renewal. It's like the Batman. It's a whole renewal idea.
And Tony had big ideas for Vegas, and plans were unable to impede his plans. And Tony had big ideas for Vegas, and planned to become the most powerful crime boss in the city, which fortunately for him wouldn't be too difficult to do, as before he had arrived in Vegas, the city was a relatively quiet and safe place. The mafia was arrived in Vegas, the city was a relatively quiet and safe place. The mafia was generating so much cash with their casino skimming operations that they had made a concentrated effort to keep the crime rate down as much as possible, so as to avoid unwanted police attention. Things were so calm that the city's biggest loan shark ran his operation out of his Tower of Pizza restaurant, and his waitresses also doubled as debt collectors. With Tony's arrival on the scene, everything changed. As one of the main FBI agents working on Tony's case would later say, quote, "Tony changed the way business was done in Vegas. He took over. The first thing he did was bring in some of his own men and impose a street tax on every bookie, loan shark, drug dealer, and pimp in town. If anyone refused to pay up, Tony would have them killed without a second thought, and their body would be left in a public place to signal to the rest of Vegas that a real gangster was now in town." Amongst Tony's crew in Vegas was his old friend Frank Collada, who had just been released from prison after serving 6 years for participating in an armored truck robbery. When he arrived in Vegas, he was taken aback at just how quickly Tony had conquered the city. By the time I got there, Tony was already running the town. He had everybody on the payroll. He owned a couple of guys in the sheriff's office and guys in the courthouse who could get him jury minutes. He even had people in the telephone company to tell him about phone taps. While Tony had quickly cemented himself as the king of the Vegas underworld, his spending habits, particularly his love of sports betting, ensured that he was always on the lookout for fast cash. With Frank in town, Tony told him to assemble a burglary crew and said that as long as they gave him a cut of every score that they could rob whomever they pleased. We started putting the arm on everyone. Bookmakers, Shylocks, dope dealers, pimps. We'd strong-arm them, beat them, shoot their guard dogs. What did we care? I had Tony's okay. In fact, half the time Tony told us who to grab. Then after we robbed them, they'd pay Tony for protection. They never had any idea that it was him who told us to rob them in the first place. Frank's burglary crew soon became infamous for their... It was him.
Rhonda.
Him who told us to rob them in the first place. Frank's burglary crew soon became infamous for their ability to break into any building undetected, no matter how tight the security. Due to their penchant for drilling holes into the wall or roof of their target building, the media began calling them the Hole-in-the-Wall Gang. Tony was at the apex of his power and ran Las Vegas with an iron fist. And unlike the bosses back in Chicago, he lived for the spotlight and loved to flaunt his influence to the media. Tony had the town covered. He was in the papers all the time. He had broads coming around in Rolls Royces who wanted to go out with him. Everybody wanted to be around a gangster, even movie stars. With Tony's notoriety only increasing, his ostentatious public persona only served to embarrass the local police and FBI, who assembled a task force of over 20 officers with the sole purpose of taking him down. They placed a listening device in the ceiling of the Gold Rush, a jewelry store owned by Tony that he used as a base of operation. Device in the ceiling of the Gold Rush, a jewelry store owned by Tony that he used as a base of operations for his criminal empire. However, it quickly became apparent that even with all of the surveillance he was under, Tony was too smart and paranoid to ever speak about business in a way that could implicate him. Instead, he spoke to his subordinates in code words, or conveyed orders with his body language, either frowning or smiling to get his point across. And anytime he did speak, he always covered his mouth because he was worried the FBI had lip readers with binoculars watching him. But while the police weren't able to learn any information that could...
So, Tony's smart, bro, in the movie too. In Nicky, bro. Yo, Pesti.
bring Tony down, since they were following him 24/7, they instead gained a deeper insight into who he was as a person. He frequently worked 18-hour days at the Gold Rush, putting together various deals and schemes, the details of which he never wrote down, but instead kept all in his head. As one of the FBI agents listening in on him would later say, quote, "Tony was the smartest and most efficient mobster I had ever seen. I think he was a genius."
Oh, this guy was damn smart with genius, bro. Like they never clarified that in the movie that much, but just a little bit, some parts, you know.
The FBI also learned just how strained the relationship was with his wife, Nancy. The two slept in separate beds and barely spoke, but when they did, it often involved an argument. Tony was also carrying on an affair behind his wife's back. One day, while his girlfriend was visiting him at the Gold Rush, Nancy bursted in and started screaming at her. Hearing the commotion, Tony came out of his office and started savagely beating his wife right there in the middle of the store, in front of all the customers. The FBI agents listening in became concerned that Tony was going to beat his wife to death right there, and so they called 911 and claimed to be workers at a restaurant next door. They couldn't tell the truth of who they were because they were worried that the Vegas police were all on Tony's payroll and would tip him off about their surveillance equipment. By the time the cops got to the Gold Rush, the situation had calmed down, and Nancy refused to press charges. In September 1972, it looked like the Chicago police were able to accomplish what had so far eluded the Vegas cops and FBI. Tony was charged with 1 count of first-degree murder and was extradited back to Chicago to stand trial for his involvement in a 1963 killing. Charles Grimaldi, a Chicago outfit hitman, had recently flipped and implicated Tony in the murder of a loan collector named Leo Foreman. Grimaldi claimed that Foreman had issues with mobster Mad Sam, which Grimaldi claimed that Foreman had issues with mobster Mad Sam, which culminated one day when Foreman pulled a gun on Sam and threw him out of his office. A couple of days
She hot, bro. What the fuck? Fucking Stormfront, bro. In Wolf of Wall Street, bro. Stormfront actress, bro.
which culminated one day when Foreman pulled a gun on Sam and threw him out of his office. A couple of days later, Foreman was lured to an abandoned house where he was tortured and murdered by Sam, Grimaldi, and Tony. While awaiting trial, Tony became increasingly concerned about the behavior of his co-defendant, the famously eccentric Mad Sam. He had recently been given a 3-year sentence for threatening to murder a witness, and had also shown up for a court appearance wearing pajamas, and for threatening to murder a witness, and had also shown up for a court appearance wearing pajamas, and sitting in a wheelchair while he yelled into a megaphone. Tony was worried that Sam's behavior would make the jury more likely to rule against them. Just 1 month before the trial was set to start, Sam scheduled a meeting with his brother and Tony in his garage. But before the meeting could begin, a masked man shot Sam twice with a shotgun before quickly disappearing. While this murder has never been solved, the FBI strongly suspects that Tony was the gunman and that he killed Sam in order to help his chances in court.
Shit.
Tony would later be found not guilty on all charges, and immediately after the verdict was read in court, he hopped on the first plane back to Nevada. During his first 5 years in Vegas, the city recorded more homicides than the previous 25 combined, and as a consequence, Tony had dealt with the full might of the U.S. justice system being brought down on him. He had been arrested numerous times, but never convicted, and no matter how sophisticated the surveillance he was under was, Tony always managed to somehow stay one step ahead of the police. But by now, Tony found himself consumed with rage by a different problem altogether, and that was that his spotlight had been taken over by his old friend and associate, Lefty Rosenthal.
Oh my god.
While Tony was occupied
He's Robert De Niro's character in the Casino movie by Martin Scorsese, peak director.
with his legal issues, Lefty had been dealing with his own problems. While Tony was occupied with his legal issues, Lefty had been dealing with his own problems. For much of 1976 and 1977, he had been embroiled in a high-profile legal fight with the Nevada Gaming Commission over their refusal to grant him a gambling license due to his alleged connections to organized crime. Lefty argued that the state was violating his constitutional rights, and even though local courts in the state routinely ruled against him, Lefty was determined to stay in the fight and take his case all the way to the Supreme Court if he had to. This sprawling legal saga dominated the media, with Lefty routinely appearing on the front. This sprawling legal saga dominated the media, with Lefty routinely appearing on the front page of every newspaper in the state. Because he lacked a valid gaming license, Lefty was appointed as the food and beverage director for the Argent Corporation, the holding company that owned 4 casinos on the Strip and was secretly controlled by the mob. He was named to this position because it was the highest Strip and was secretly controlled by the mob. He was named to this position because it was the highest title he could legally hold without a license. But Lefty leveraged his new position and used it to get himself a weekly column in the Las Vegas Sun newspaper where he mused on the hot-button issues of the time.
What the fuck?
He also launched the Frank Rosenthal newspaper where he mused on the hot-button issues of the time. He also launched the Frank Rosenthal Show, a talk show where performers at the casinos were featured before Lefty interviewed a celebrity who over its 2-year run would include legendary football player Jim Brown, Frank Sinatra, and even O.J. Simpson. While the show aired only sporadically, when it was on, it was one of the highest-rated TV programs in the local area, making Lefty a bona fide Vegas star. This didn't sit well with many of Lefty's mob associates, who were becoming increasingly concerned about the attention he was bringing to them. But the person most upset was Tony, who hated that Lefty had sucked up all of the publicity that he had once received. One night after filming the Frank Rosenthal Show, Lefty went to a nightclub with a whole entourage. One night after filming the Frank Rosenthal Show, Lefty went to a nightclub with a whole entourage, and as he walked in, everyone in the club stood up from their table to shake his hand and wish him well. Everyone, that is, except for Tony, who instead stayed seated and seethed before proclaiming, "Look at that arrogant fuck! He thinks he's too good to even come over here and say hello. While Lefty was on top of the world and basking in the spotlight, Tony was forced to keep a low profile due to the 24/7 police surveillance he was still under. Tony's influence within the criminal underworld had also been greatly diminished due to his legal troubles, and by now his crew were stuck doing mostly small-time jobs. One of the FBI agents assigned to his case would later say, quote, "We got Spilotro running errands more than running casinos." Frank Collada would later speculate that Tony's increasing paranoia, combined with his jealousy, Frank Collada would later speculate that Tony's increasing paranoia, combined with his jealousy over Lefty's fame, had caused a sort of psychotic break, and he became obsessed with delusions of grandeur, telling Frank that he was planning on going back to Chicago and wiping out the entire leadership of the outfit. When Frank pointed out that powerful mobsters in New York, Kansas City, and Philadelphia would never stand for such an action taking place, Tony shrugged and said that he'd have to kill them too. Tony envisioned himself as the second coming of Lucky Luciano, and that he'd have to kill them too. Tony envisioned himself as the second coming of Lucky Luciano, and that Lefty would be his Lansky. But after presenting his master plan to Lefty, he was turned down. I could see that he was really coming to hate Lefty. He thought Lefty was pissing on his parade. Lefty had turned him down one too many times. Tony wasn't alone in this hatred, as Lefty's long-suffering wife, Jerry, had grown to despise him for forcing her to have another child against her wishes. Long-suffering wife, Jerry, had grown to despise him for forcing her to have another child against her wishes. The two soon began an affair. Tony insisted that it be kept as secret as possible, because he knew that fooling around with a mobster's wife was considered an egregious offense in mob culture. But despite his best efforts, word eventually got out. But by 1978, Tony had much bigger problems. Word despise him. Tony wasn't alone in this hatred, as Lefty's long-suffering wife, Jerry, had grown to despise him for forcing her to have another child against her wishes. The two soon began an affair. Tony insisted that it be kept as secret as possible, because he knew that fooling around with a mobster's wife was considered an egregious offense in mob culture. But despite his best efforts, word eventually got out. But by 1978, Tony had much bigger problems. Frustrated with their lack of success in convicting Tony, Vegas police scored a major victory when they were able to convince the Nevada Gaming Commission to put Tony's name in the fabled Black Book, meaning that he was officially banned from entering any casino in the state. This move made it practically impossible for him to oversee the skimming of casino profits, which was the entire reason why the Chicago bosses sent him over there in the first place. To make matters worse, in the spring of 1978, the FBI launched a massive raid on the gold rush that involved over 50 agents. They seized everything from cash to tape recordings to financial records, and the raid generated so much publicity that Tony found himself on the front page of every newspaper for the next week.
Holy shit.
And while the raid ended up being a massive bust with Tony and all of his associates being released without charges, the bad press it generated turned into another point of contention for the Chicago bosses, who were quickly coalescing around the opinion that Tony was becoming more trouble than he was worth. Their breaking point would come in 1981, when on July 4th, Frank and the entire hole-in-the-wall gang were arrested, whilst they were trying to break into Bertha's Gifts and Amp Home Furnishings, which they believed had a large amount of cash on hand due to a 4th of July sale. As soon as they had drilled through the roof, they were completely surrounded by a large amount of police. This was because Sal Romano, the group's alarm system specialist, had become an informant and tipped off the police about the group's plans. But they weren't the only arrests the police made, as in addition to the hole-in-the-wall gang, many of the top mobsters in Chicago, including outfit boss Joey Doves, were also indicted for their role in the casino skimming operation. The intricate details of just how the police were finally able to take down the mob's Vegas operations will be extensively covered in a future video on Lefty Rosenthal. But suffice it to say, the bosses placed an exorbitant amount of the blame squarely on Tony for all of the attention he had brought on himself. But Tony was oblivious to this, and his main concern now was staying out of prison.
So they all blamed it on Tommy, the police.
He knew that the government's case against him was dependent on the testimony of Sal Romano. But Sal and Tony had never actually spoken face to face. The only person who could prove that Tony had ordered Sal... Tony had never actually spoken face to face. The only person who could prove that Tony had ordered Sal to do anything was Frank. And so one morning, as Frank was sound asleep, he was awoken by the sound of gunshots. And as he looked outside, he saw that his next-door neighbor had been gunned down, and a group of masked men were speeding away in a van. Then a couple of weeks later, the FBI played Frank a recording of Tony putting out a contract on him. This was enough to convince Frank to flip and agree to testify against Tony in court. He admitted to police his role in over 6 murders that were committed on Tony's orders. He also confessed that it was his phone call that ultimately led Billy McCarthy to his death. But at trial, his testimony would ultimately prove insufficient, as it was his word against Tony's, and the police had no hard evidence against him. Tony was once again acquitted at trial, but was indicted yet again not long after, due to his role in the casino skimming operation. While out on bail awaiting trial, Tony visited the house of his brother Michael on June 4th, 1980. While out on bail awaiting trial, Tony visited the house of his brother Michael on June 4th, 1986. The two then left in Michael's car and drove to meet high-ranking mobster Jimmy Marcello in a hotel parking lot. The two brothers somehow believed that for his efforts in Vegas, Tony was up for a promotion while his brother was about to become a made man. They got into Jimmy's car, and then the three traveled to a house 10 minutes away in the Chicago suburbs for the ceremony they assumed was about to take place. But unbeknownst to the brothers, a couple of days before, all of the top Chicago bosses who weren't yet in prison held a secret meeting to discuss their upcoming court cases and what their best course of action would be. All of the men present agreed that their current misfortunes were solely Tony's fault for how he had mismanaged things in Vegas, and they agreed that he needed to go. So when he and his brother arrived, they were led into the basement, where they were then beaten to death by a group of 11 Chicago outfit members.
Damn. So in the movie, they were Tony and his brother, and Joe Pesci, Joe Pesci, playing Nicky Santoro and his brother were killed in a desert. Yeah.
Their bodies were then put into the trunk of a car and driven over an hour away over the Illinois border and into Indiana, where they were buried in a cornfield. And that was the story of Tony Spilotro.
Holy
If
shit.
you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. Thanks, and I'll see you next time. In the sprawling urban jungle of 1960s Chicago, a flamboyant and barbarous figure emerged.
Was the real... Oh. Goodfellas. The fuck? T07. Casino Joe Pesci played Nicky Santoro, short-tempered monster from Chicago who was sent by his bosses to oversee the operations in Vegas. Spilotro was based off of Tony Spilotro, and this year's video examines his shocking rise and fall. Where there's a rise, there's a fall. It's always gonna be like that. Bacon Brothers. He's saying that. Huh. The blue fur picture of blue. The fuck? Man of recaps. Crime stories.
In the
Anthony Imperiale. True story. This guy was in the. This guy is supposed to be. Sopranos. Oh, that was a lot. It's processing, bro. Imperiale. History.
In the TV
Hitman. Biker War. Criminal celebrities. The fuck. This is one guy, Vox Jice. Brand
before the age of
A$AP Rocky. Damn.
when Diddy got arrested by the Department of Homeland Security.
Diddy, bro. Our creators.
Queen.
So you probably heard about
Damn.
look at your out.
Keep saying it's the best game, bro, but I don't think I have it yet. Return to Freddy's. Freddy's. Whoops. Got an hour left. This is the final video. Well, I'm not gonna watch this now. Sorry, my bad. Man of recaps. Hold up. Just eat something. Damn hungry. Yeah. Alright, I'm back. I just ate a piece of Garnier bread, bro. I'm gonna play Phantom Forces. Huh. Hello, hello. I broke it. Thought my mic went away or something. Hold up. Man of recaps. Huh. Shit. Always the wrong account. Fuck. Phantom Forces. Gotta grind, we gotta grind. Everything. Every single. Gotta grind this game, bro. Shit. Fuck. Wait, why can't I? Bro, I swear. This is upsetting right now. Hold up. There we go. The fuck? Why is it not popping up? What the fuck? Is it game capture? Huh. Wait, hold up. Hold up. Where the fuck did it go, bro? What the fuck? Hmm. Bro, this thing is a pain, bro. Hold up. This point, bro. Shoot. Okay, there we go. Never mind. Let's look at TikTok. Wait, my toes, bro. I have toes.
So, you like the hip hop, like the Kendrick Lamar,
The fuck?
For real, bro? Are you kidding me right now? Do you know how to do the twerking, or the Beyonce, the da 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 da, the twerking, Please, are you serious? You're just saying that. You're just saying that because I'm black, right? Yes. We could be the Witch Khalifa, the Witch Khalifa. We could be the black and yellow, black and yellow, black and yellow. You are very beautiful. Oh, I like the black girls. You like the hip hop.
No, hell no.
Você não errou, não. Você fez com o seu coração. Mas às vezes o coração engana a gente.
Okay.
What kind of car do you drive? 2017 Honda Accord. What?
It's you?
Oh.
Yeah, I know it's me. Who are you? You don't remember me? No? Did I? I walked into the street. The car almost hit me. You swooped me up. You saved me. You said you needed me.
Heads up, watch out. There you go. You okay? You alright?
Just Spider-Man.
Costume gets it away, huh? Look, you look pretty important, Max.
How do you know my name?
It's written on your badge.
I'm a nobody.
Hey, you're not a nobody. You're somebody. Look that. All right, listen to me. Now I need you. You're my eyes and ears out here. All right?
All right. Whoa, look who's here. Spidey. I've been out saving the world. Protecting
Save the world.
But is someone celebrating a birthday today? That's why you're here.
We was gonna go to the birthday.
You know, Spider-Man
Gonna
said,
go to.
out of all the people in the whole city, he saved me. He saved me.
Those power grids were designed by me.
You designed them. Sure you did. And I'm Spider-Man.
You're no Spider-Man. He's a Leo. You're a Sagittarius. You respect him again, I'm gonna rip your well-groomed head off.
The guy with the blueprints.
Yes, blueprints.
Yes, I remember you. Of course I remember. You have my eyes and ears. Is it Max?
Yes.
How are you?
I don't know what's going on with me.
I can see that. I believe you. I can see that you don't want to hurt anybody. It'll be all right.
Got a clear shot. Standing by.
I don't want them shooting
I'm not
me.
gonna shoot you. You guys, this is my buddy Max. I told you about Max. No one shoots at Max. You and me, okay? It's just you and me talking. Whoa, stay right there. Stay right there. Just be careful. The grate, because the electricity.
I just wanted everyone to see me.
He makes a move, you take that shot.
How about you come with me? Go somewhere we'll talk.
Yeah, yeah.
No, stop! Stay with me, Max.
You lied to me.
No, try to.
Hold up. Oh.
Let me help you. You know, Max was like the sweetest guy ever before he fell into a pool of electric eels. Hey, Max! I missed you, man! Max. Will we just talk for a second? Just you and me? Just talk?
Look who showed up. My old friend Spider-Man.
Trying to save you, Max. That's all I've ever wanted.
Back to being a nobody.
You were never a nobody.
Yes, I was.
Oh yeah, I forgot this. He was a normal guy in the in the No Way Home. The fuck? Yeah, bro.
You got a nice face.
Anything in the room, bro.
You from Queens. You got that suit. You help a lot of poor people. I just thought you was gonna be black. Oh man, I'm sorry. I don't apologize. There's gotta be a black Spider-Man somewhere out there. Goddamn is. It's you? Yeah, I know it's me. I went to visit.
Hi guys, I'm at my first.
The Bible is the.
Okay, bro. Enough of TikTok, bro. My TikTok is gonna curse. So I got some toast downstairs. Let me just eat them for a second. Hold up. Shit. Ooh, I need to pick up the phone, bro. What the fuck? Oh my god. Oh shit, I jealous you. Should I watch this guy? Man, recaps, man. Oh shit, I forgot to change. Yo, the fucking the true story of Jordan Belfort. Hot tub machine. The fuck?
How real was that film compared to your life?
Most of it was true. The big things, though, that weren't true, they made it seem like I went down to Wall Street as this naive babe in the woods. And then the next scene, they had me in a strip club with 5 hookers snorting coke. That didn't happen. That de-evolution of the human spirit took about 2.5 to 3 years. Another thing, when I say,
I'm not fucking leaving. The show goes on.
and that speech was almost dead on balls accurate, except I never said I'm not leaving because I'm not stupid. I actually did leave. Another thing that was a meeting on the yacht with the FBI agent. That was just purely invented. But I did know about Coleman, and we were like arch enemies from this distance.
How real was that?
Oh. Week 24.
All right, people always ask, was my real life as wild as the movie? Listen, for all you people behind the scenes here, it was 1,000 times fucking wilder than the movie. Listen, I always say I've fallen asleep in every great restaurant in the world. It's actually true. Listen, of course, I'm more mellow today, but we were fucking out of our minds. And the shit that we did, especially at my bachelor party, where we literally reached such levels of depravity, was animals present. I mean, like 1,000 hookers there. It was just completely nuts. So yes, my wife was completely out of control, even wilder than the movie.
This guy he was just the used car salesman. Yeah. I put 725. Fuck.
was up on pharmacy.
Oh. Damn. Lost without you. Al Capone. Oh.
I came to Chicago with $40 in my pocket. My son is now 12. I'm still married and I love my wife dearly. We had to make a living. I was younger than I am now and thought I needed more. I didn't believe in prohibiting people from getting the things they wanted. I thought prohibition was an unjust law, and I still do.
289. May 28, 2008. C. Card 2. Funny video with his girlfriend. Men are brave. Rookie.
Everybody has some form.
The fuck? Joe Rogan. He interviewed Donald Trump. Experience Donald Trump.